They got that, by the way.
Oh, no. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Today, I will be speaking on the pros and cons of bioengineered foods and how we consume them, how we produce them, and what the benefits and disadvantages of them are. And in my speech, I will be talking about 4 major points. The first one is crop resiliency. The second one is consumer nutrition and caloric value. And the third point is environmental risk, how growing bioengineered foods can negatively impact fields and the environment where it grows, how it can affect normal wild type crops as well, and then the costs associated with gene patents and how that can affect small businesses and family-owned farms. So first, I will talk about how bioengineering can protect crops from vulnerabilities, specifically droughts, flooding, and aphids, or pests in general. Bioengineering does reduce the need for chemical pesticides, which is very interesting. There was a study done from the National Library of Medicine where they took CRISPR, which is a genetic modification procedure, and they were able to modify the genome of corn and rice and wheat, which made it more resistant to flooding and more resistant to droughts. And so an edit on that same chromosome was able to simultaneously make it more resistant to water, but also more resistant to less water. So it's very interesting. And they also saw from the 2024 Britannica study called Genetic Modification on Plants and Genomic Data, they saw that it was able to lower chemical pesticide use by 37% and increase crop yield production by 22%. And so we can see that by just editing the genome, it lowers the need for chemical pesticides, which we know are not good for our environment, nor are they good for our bodies. It also makes it more resistant to things like pests and aphids, particularly, which are always a nuisance, especially for amateur gardeners, but also for mass and commercial produced farms. Genetic modification also makes produce more nutrition and longer lasting. So this is something called an Arctic apple, and there is an enzyme in apples and potatoes specifically called polyphenol oxidase. Polyphenol oxidase is a type of kinase that allows for degradation. And so if you can knock out that gene in apples, it's something that I actually did last semester for Dr. Kokonis in the genomics lab. We were able to take out the kinase, the polyphenol oxidase in potatoes and put it into apples to speed up the degradation process, but you can do the reverse. You can take it out and make it last longer on the shelf or in a can. You can also make it more nutritious in that it has higher energy bonds. It also has just tastier food in general, because higher energy bonds are typically more sugary. And so you do have kind of a cost-benefit analysis of that as well. You can also, some researchers made something called golden rice, which they found was able to reduce blindness, childhood blindness in 500,000 patients in third world countries, because this golden rice has genetically modified vitamin A in it. Normal rice does not have it, but golden rice does. And so in developing countries, if you give them this golden rice, which can grow in droughts or flooding conditions, it is able to help the children specifically of that population. Now some cons. Some cons of bioengineering is that it can produce resistant weeds, because of course if you have a resistant crop, then eventually the weeds are going to follow. And there was a study by the International Supply of Herbs and resistant to genetically modified weeds, said that there are over 500 known unique biotypes of resistant weeds, which is a lot, because we have to come up with more ways to fight invasive weeds. Another thing is crossing boundaries. There was an anecdote from the medical news today by a farmer named David Vines in 2022. He's an organic farmer, but he said that the pollen from his neighbor's land that does have genetically modified organisms was coming into his field and affecting his crops, which means he could lose his organic license, which is a problem. The last kind of cons that we have are skepticism and cost. A lot of people in just general populace, in fact, research shown in 2016 said that 38% of adults do not think that GMOs are healthy. And there is some data to prove that it does not add genetic or caloric value, it just makes it bigger, which can be seen in some studies. And then the National Sustainable Agricultural Coalition cited that farmers cannot compete with companies, specifically biotech companies, that have patents on these specific seeds and on these genes. And every year, the farmers cannot save their seeds from that year's harvest. They have to release them back to the companies, which is very, very expensive because they have to pay again the next year to replant them. So that is very shark-like and not sustainable for farmers and small businesses. Here are my references, and I hope that you learned a little bit more about the pros and cons of genetically modified food and how it can affect us as consumers and in our everyday environments. Thank you.